the IWI Masada. Who's it for? People who want a Glock 17 that don't want a Glock 17. The IWI Masada is a duty size 17+1 9mm handgun made by IWI. I am a huge fan of IWI products, so I was really excited to get this gun and to be able to try it out before it was released to the press. Now, there's been some talk about the IWI Masada. Nothing has really gelled, but it's been on IWI's webpage since like 2018. So people have known about it, but it actually hasn't come into production until 2019, and it's finally on the way. Me personally, huge Glock guy also, so I'm gonna look at it and I'm gonna say, why do I want this new upstart pistol, albeit made by an established manufacturer? Why am I gonna want this instead of a Glock 17? Well, it does many things that the Glock 17 does. It's very similar to the Glock 17, but it costs $100 less. And for that matter, I was really impressed with the performance of the gun, so I can see that IWI is definitely going to have a market, although they might have to compete with the Smith & Wesson M&P series, which has been out a little bit longer. Now, before I start hitting pipe on these observations, on my range day observations, why don't we talk about the specs of this gun compared to the Glock 17? The trigger pull, trigger weight, reset, everything are similar on the Glock and the IWI. They're not the same. They definitely feel different, but they also feel kind of the same, if you know what I mean. You've got that take up right before it hits the wall, then you've got 5.5 to 6.5 pounds of pressure to bring it back and release that striker on both guns. It even has the little trigger dongle thing, safety, like the little mini trigger that's inside the main trigger. You guys know what I'm talking about, but that's there too. It's also got about the same reset travel, audible, tactile reset. So of course, I mean, they're smart. Either make the trigger a lot better or make it virtually the same. They made it the same as the Glock 17. Now, even though both guns are 17+1, there are some dimensional variants. You have, say, the Gen 4 Glock 17, which weighs 22 ounces. You're looking at 23.5 ounces for the IWI Masada. Height and width are very similar between the two. You're looking at 5.6 inches high on the IWI. You're looking at 5.5 inches tall on the Glock 17. It's very similar in that respect. The IWI is 1.34 inches thick versus 1.26 inches thick for the Glock 17. Also interesting and kind of weird, for some reason the IWI has a 4.1 inch barrel versus the Glock 17's 4.5 inch barrel. So it's barely longer than a Glock 19 barrel, even though it's in a Glock 17 size package. Like most Glock 17s, you're talking about a cold hammer forged, polygonally rifled barrel, which is top notch. I think it's intriguing that IWI decided that they would go with a duty size gun instead of the much more popular compact 15+1 size gun like the Glock 19. You see, Ruger did that right out of the gate with the Security 9. They just came out with a 15+1. Smith & Wesson finally, with the 2.0 compact, said, hey, we're gonna take the Glock 19 head on. So you have this trend of people who all of a sudden woke up like 3 or 4 years ago and are like, oh man, for like 2 decades, the Glock 19 has been the most popular size of handgun. Maybe we should do that too. Well, no shit. So finally everybody's doing that, but for some reason, IWI, and I'm not holding it against them. If that's what they want to do, whatever, cool, you do you, IWI, but they went with a 17+1 full-size, duty-size gun instead of a compact size gun right out of the gate. If you guys have been staying up on the Masada, you have seen on their website that it lists a serialized modular chassis that's easy to remove. Very interesting. It turns out that the chassis inside the gun, kind of like the 320, right? You can just pop it right out and put it into a new frame. So screw it. If you get the IWI Masada right now, presumably you're going to be able to buy a compact frame later. The controls are fully ambi. They make a model that has a safety if you're into that kind of thing. They've got small, medium, and large back straps that come with the gun. It has forward slide serrations, which most Glock 17s do not have. A big complaint with the Glock 17, but IWI went and addressed that right out of the box. Also, they make an optics ready model. I don't know at this point what the price difference is going to be between the standard model and the optics ready model, but I thought it was very intriguing that they said, look, at production, we realized that adding red dots to your pistol is becoming very popular and even being allowed on duty guns. So IWI said, look, we'll just make it compatible right out of the gate. Good job, IWI. Oh, I don't know what it is about shooting new guns that just makes me hot. The Masada, of course, comes with a series of plates so you can use your favorite micro red dot. Interestingly enough, they're polymer. The plates are polymer. And at first that bothered me, but then I remembered some of my favorite guns have polymer frames, so it's like maybe it's not that big a deal. They actually lock up really tight, snug fit. So tentatively, you know, I'm still a little apprehensive, but I don't think I have a problem using polymer optics plates. Anyways, we're gonna find out today. So now let's get a little dirty with my shooting impressions and my overall opinion and conclusion about this gun. So my FFL said, man, have you felt this IWI yet? It feels like junk. And then I said, no, I haven't. And I went and I checked it out, and it didn't feel cheap to me. My FFL said this gun feels cheap. It didn't feel cheap to me. It felt Israeli. If you guys that have dealt with like the Ronis, like the micro Roni carbines, and bought anything from Zahal ever, you'll know what I'm talking about. So it doesn't feel cheap, it just feels different. It doesn't feel like a Glock 17, but I don't have any reason to believe that the frame is any different or inferior or superior, but I get it. I guess I want to throw out there that there are people that said the gun felt cheap. I don't see it, but it does cost $100 less than a Glock 17. And again, as being familiar with Israeli products, Israeli firearms, it just felt Israeli to me. It didn't feel cheap per se, but it wasn't like, poof, it didn't blow my mind. I didn't love it right out of the box. And that's how everybody else felt at the range. I got the Optics Ready model. I slapped a Hollow Sun on top of it. Woo, boy, did my opinion change when we actually got out there on the range. Guys, gang, you should see that. I'm gonna turn this camera around so you can see. I just put a ragged hole with 2 rapid fire magazines with this pistol and the Hollow Sun optic at 10 yards. Check this out. Woo, look at that. Top left-hand corner. You guys see that? Pretty good. I wasn't like, wow, this is an incredible shooting experience. I shot the 320X Compact and I was like, wow. I shot the SIG 365 for the first time. I was like, wow. I didn't shoot this gun and it wasn't like, man, this thing, it's a game changer. I was like, okay, well, this is a little bit like shooting a Glock. However, for some reason, I shot it really freaking well. Maybe it's that Hollow Sun, but we were shooting at 10 yards and there's a target I'll throw up right now. I shot 2 magazines, rapid fire, dumped 2 magazines into a target, and all the rounds were basically touching. Now, it was a little bit of a cheat because I had that Hollow Sun micro red dot on top of it, but it was working. And it was 100% reliable. We had no issues. I didn't clean it before. Sorry guys, I don't clean and lube my guns when I get them. I'm sorry, I'm lazy. I'm a lazy piece of garbage, but I don't do it. And I had no failures. It worked perfectly. We shot HST, we shot polymer jacketed Federal Syntech, which is awesome, by the way. Love that stuff. Ran perfectly. And guys, we're gonna start this thing off stout. I'm loading up Federal HST, Federal sent in some HST for this test, so we're going straight into jacketed hollow points made for self-defense, because that's typically what you think you're going to be using this gun for, is self-defense. So let's give it a shot, see how it does. Not a bad little group, 16 rounds of HST right there, had one little flyer. Nice little cluster there, I like it. So I guess if I had to describe it, I would say it is a deceptively good performer. I really wish I had it for more time so I could torture test it, throw it in the mud, and really wring it out. But just for the initial impressions, I guess I was pretty impressed. Final thoughts on the IWI Masada. In this video, I've been saying Glock 17, Glock 17, Glock 17, comparing it a lot to the Glock 17. It's an easy comparison to make. You're talking about a gun that's relatively the same size, weight, dimensions, everything, same capacity, a 17 plus 1 9mm handgun, polymer frame, striker fired, but there are some differences. Now, let's talk about something maybe on the negative side. One difference is this is a new gun. This is a brand new gun. The Glock has decades of reliable service. It's a proven firearm. And IWI certainly knows that. I'm a huge Glock guy. I think the Glock 17 is a legendary pistol. So there's no real comparison to any new, not just IWI, but any new polymer frame, striker fired handgun. Not at least to the Glock 17. Now, the differences that favor the IWI Masada, it's going to be less expensive. You have optics mounting options right out of the box. You've got forward slide serrations, but perhaps the biggest difference is the one that I'm holding here in my hand, and that is the ability to change out your frame by using the serialized trigger chassis without having to do any paperwork or buy a new gun. The frame is the serialized component on a Glock, so if you have a Glock 17, you're stuck with a Glock 17 size gun unless you want to take a jigsaw or a Dremel tool to it, which is a terrible idea unless you're an expert. So with the IWI, presumably if this format takes off, then they're going to be offering this in different size frames, probably compact, subcompact, and you've got more options in terms of frame sizes. Plus, it's going to be cheaper, which is smart because it's pretty hard right now to take on Glock at their price point, especially with something new like this, even if it does have a little bit more bells and whistles compared to the standard Glock out of the box. So, notwithstanding the fact that I'm saying Glock, 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 Glock the entire time, you are talking about guns that are similar in some ways, but different in many other ways. All in all, so far I think this is a success. This gun hasn't even been released yet to production, so I don't know how things are going to turn out. I only have a couple boxes of ammo through mine, so I'm not making any predictions right now in terms of how the IWI Masada is going to perform in the market or at the range, but I had a great experience with it. It shot really well. If you guys are out there that you want a Glock 17, but you don't want a Glock 17, or for some reason you don't like the M&P, this is a great option. I highly recommend that you look at it. It shot deceptively well, and that's, I guess, what I would say. If you're thinking about buying an M&P, or you're considering this, it's less expensive, or a Glock 17, shoot all of them all next to each other, because the thing is, out of the box, I was like, wow, I'm really not gonna be impressed with this. And then I went out and shot it, and I shot it pretty freaking well. So I was surprised at how well it performed for me, and it might do the same for you. So I would recommend that you try it out. IWI, thanks a ton for sending me the gun to try out. I think you guys did a great job. Federal, thanks a ton for the ammo. Same to you, Ventura Munitions. Couldn't do it without you guys. Blue Alpha Gear, we appreciate your support. Subscribers, thank you so much. Patreon supporters, most of all, you guys are the best. You're keeping us in business. Our videos are getting demonetized freaking constantly on YouTube. We could not be, I mean it, we couldn't be here right now if it weren't for our Patreon supporters. So please, guys, go to patreon.com/TFBTV and help us out. I love you all. See you next week.